series of important elections will be held in the next 2 years in Europe, starting with the German elections in September 2021. Those elections will be followed by 2 more in April 2022, the French presidential election and Hungary's parliamentary elections. Elections in both Italy and Spain are not scheduled to take place until 2023. But because the political situation in both countries is unstable, no one would be really surprised if either government fell and elections took place before then. All these elections are obviously important for the countries concerned, but they also have consequences for their neighbours and partners in the European Union. In particular, how the elections turn out may affect the political coalitions of left and right in the European Parliament. That's at present dominated by a grand coalition of the Conservative EPP, the Socialist Bloc, and the Liberals. But would that coalition be sustained if the German Christian Democrats lost their leading position in the German Parliament and were even left out of the governing grand coalition there altogether? So there may be big changes coming in European politics. What might they be? The first straw in the wind, and it's proving to be a pretty big straw, the kind of straw that breaks a camel's back, were the French local elections in June. France has a 2-stage electoral system. The first stage has a large number of candidates, but whittles them down to a choice between parties with serious levels of support in the second. You might say that the first stage enables you to vote for your favourite party, even if it's a small one, the second to have second thoughts when you're making a more realistic choice. The French do say that the first round allows you to vote for a candidate, the second to vote against one 2 weeks later. This June's elections proved to be a big surprise in the first round, and the second round confirmed that surprise. The 2 politicians expected to be the frontrunners and the final 2 candidates in next year's presidential elections saw their parties do very badly. The big winners were the centre-right Republicans. At the Danube Institute, we brought together 3 knowledgeable observers of the French political scene. Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, the Paris correspondent of the Sunday Telegraph. Ágnes Magyar, the Danube Institute's resident researcher on French politics, and Erik Tegnér, a political journalist and activist who last year put together a convocation of the French right, bringing together politicians from the main conservative factions. They'll discuss the first round results before knowing the second, and then they'll reconvene to see how their prediction turned out a week later. Let's see how they do. I begin by asking Anne-Elisabeth Moutet this question. Since the French seem to be fed up with the parties and politicians and policies they've been given in the last 30 years, is it really such a bad thing that the frontrunners, President Macron, and National Rally leader Marine Le Pen, did so badly in the first round?
I think it's a bad thing, but I think the worst thing is the elephant in the room. It's the fact that so few people bothered to vote. And I gave, an emollient reason a minute ago, but the other reason is that people didn't bother because they don't feel that they're represented by anyone. And last time, Marine Le Pen scored very high against Emmanuel Macron, the highest that the National Rally has been. And people thought, well, next time is her moment, especially if he fails as a president, which largely you can say he did. But she herself has been seen, she's been there too long, and she starts now looking like the other politicians, and what you see is a general rejection of all politicians. In the meantime, I said National Rally. She called her party the National Rally in an effort to change it from what it used to be, the National Front. But she gave no idea that she had either a different platform, that she was organized, or indeed that she wanted to follow people's actual expectations in things like immigration and Islam. She's been much milder than she used to be. She's been very mild about Brexit. She doesn't want to leave the EU, she doesn't want to leave the Euro, and therefore she was a candidate that people voted for in a large measure in the last presidential election largely because she annoyed every other candidate. And incidentally, this is also the reason why Macron was elected. It's because he was young, he was new, nobody knew where he came from, and they wanted to someone who would really poke in the eye any of the incumbents, any of the old-style politicians that both now look like old-style politicians. And I'm afraid that what you could see in France now, if there's any kind of problem, and honestly, between the pandemic, which is not quite over, and the economic crisis that's going to follow from the money thrown at the pandemic, any time that we start having problems in France, then we'll have another yellow vest revolt, or you will have another personality coming out, and nobody knows what kind of personality will come out of it. It's a crisis of democracy, and I think it's a really dangerous one. I'm comparing this to Britain, where Boris Johnson managed to neutralize parties like the UKIP party and the Brexit party by essentially listening to the voters. And I'm afraid that we are in France in a much more difficult situation than Britain is, which is not something that Mr. Macron would like to hear.
I'm going to ask you one quick question, and then we know you have to leave. Maybe we'll make this the first of two programs. But given what you just said, that the French electors have now been frustrated a second time, maybe a third or a fourth, in getting something apart from what they've had for the last 30 years. Do you see what candidate would you see might emerge from this who could satisfy that yearning for change plausibly?
Do you know, I think actually there isn't one. And I'm really sorry to say to Erik that I don't think Erik Zemmour can do it. For all sorts of reasons. I think he can be absolutely sparkling and interesting, but at the end of the day, there are various reasons why I don't think he can be the candidate of the majority. Even though he expresses many of the concerns of the majority. There's someone who's never expressed any interest for the presidential election so far, who is Robert Ménard, the mayor of Béziers, because he became the mayor of a southern town with lots of problems. He's a hard right, less than Zemmour, and he was sort of in a sister party to Marine Le Pen's, and he addressed everyday concerns, and that was interesting. But other than that, it could be anyone on the right or on the left, or as Erik said, it could be Xavier Bertrand, faute de mieux. Xavier Bertrand is the Républicain, traditional right candidate. He was Minister for Social Affairs and Health under Nicolas Sarkozy. He's not a graduate of the elite school ENA. He now has a window of opportunity. It's a very narrow window. He's got a window of opportunity to make people believe that he really is different. But they have become very cynical, very jaded, very annoyed, and nobody knows where all of this is going.
Well, Anne-Elisabeth, I know you have to go, so I'm going to hand over to Erik, and he will argue with you when you are absent. That's a very, very sensible thing to do in my experience of arguing with Anne-Elisabeth. But over to you, Erik, and if you have to disappear before he finishes, we'll understand. Okay.
Bye.
All the best. Thank you very much for being here. We'll see you soon. Erik.
I just think that you forgot Edouard Philippe. I think that one of the candidates could be Edouard Philippe. Is finally the problem of Xavier Bertrand is that he wants to be, the person who could win against Marine Le Pen. So he could be the solution of exchange from the system party. If Emmanuel Macron can't win the next election, the system would find another candidate. And Xavier Bertrand thinks he could be this candidate. I think that it will be Edouard Philippe if Emmanuel Macron is not enough strong to win against Marine Le Pen. Xavier Bertrand is the same person ideologically than Emmanuel Macron. That's the key of the problem. After what Erik Zemmour runs for what she just said, if Erik Zemmour runs to the presidency, there are polls explaining that he would take a lot of votes to the candidate of the Republicans. So Xavier Bertrand, maybe. So it could be a good solution for Emmanuel Macron. We could say that, but after, I think that's the main problem today is not for Emmanuel Macron, it's for Marine Le Pen. She had a very good argument about people who stayed home, Before, we have to understand, when the French population was hungry, they voted for Marine Le Pen on the Rassemblement National. Today, they stay home. So, we need a candidate who mobilize the people. And I think Xavier Bertrand is not the good person. I think Erik Zemmour could do it, and Emmanuel Macron could do it too. So we will see.
Thank you. Now let me ask Ágnes to come in here.
Yes, just concerning your thoughts about Xavier Bertrand, I would say, and please confirm if I am right, about Thierry Mariani. Thierry Mariani and the whole thing, the PACA region, you know, this is the south region of France. There were big hopes for the National Ally that time when in 2015, Marion Maréchal gained more than 42% or something like this in the first round. But for the second round, he lost finally because of the alliances which were made just in order to block her and the whole Rassemblement National, or that time it was just Front National. And now we also have the hope that Thierry Mariani, who was at that time a minister who was in charge of transport several years ago, so he was a hardlines droitière, on peut dire, we can say, somebody who was really for the right wing, conservative, who was quite firm on migration issues, for example. And at that time, 2 or 3 years ago, maybe a bit, maybe 4 years ago, he left the Republicans and he became a candidate of Marine Le Pen's party. Now, the people who are living there have good hope and hopes for him. What do you think? Can he win the only one region? Because it could be the only one region which can be the territoire of Rassemblement National. So can it happen?
I think it's over for him. I think it will be a defeat on this weekend. Why? Because, just yesterday, the left ecologists wanted to maintain for the second term. And finally, they retire, they get off. So there's a big Republican front against Thierry Mariani. He will never win this election. And that's why I think that it will be worse for Marine Le Pen just next week. Because for 2 reasons. First, we will see that she didn't win any election.
Yeah.
And secondly, I think that Rassemblement National electors won't move more for this weekend. I think that's why I'm taking a risk by saying that. But I think they will stay home much more than this weekend. Because they will have the idea, okay, Rassemblement National will never win. So why would I go to vote that big sun on, I have my family, it was a very hard year and so on. So it is completely useful to go there. And there is another thing, very surprising coming from the direction of Rassemblement National this weekend. They insulted all the Front National electors who didn't go to vote. It was very, they have a kind of behavior like teenagers. Okay, you are not coming to vote, it's a problem, it's your fault, and so on. It's crazy.
Yes.
A politician, his function is to convince people to go. Would you see, a company who would insult, his client because they don't buy anymore the products? So it's a big problem, and I think really not.
Let me ask you the first of 2 questions. And I'll ask you first and then back to you, Ágnes. I mean, we have not had a lot of discussion about the left here. The left seems to have begun to disappear. Obviously, in the last presidential elections, I think the Socialist Party went down to 7% of the vote. And Mélenchon, who is the far left, he had, in the first presidential round, he had a solid performance, almost the same as everybody else, about 20%. And yet, somehow or other, this whole wing of politics seems to be shrinking or evaporating. In view of this, what's the advice you would have to give to the left?
The whole left, united in France, is now 20%. 5 years ago, it was 40%. So it's huge. But for these elections, regional elections, the Socialist Party maintained its positions. Because the other lesson of this election is that the personality who were in place just have been favorized, so they are re-elected. But we need to look at in the region of Paris, because in Paris, in the Ile-de-France region, there is Valérie Pécresse. And Valérie Pécresse had a big score, 36%. But in front of her,
I should ask you to explain to the viewers who she is exactly.
Valérie Pécresse is, one of the person from Les Républicains who wants to run for the next president.
Some Macronist, sorry.
It's complicated. But in Les Républicains, you have four personalities. Xavier Bertrand, Laurent Wauquiez on the right of Les Républicains, and Valérie Pécresse is more on the line of Xavier Bertrand. But she's a woman, so it's better in France. But she could lose the election this weekend because in front of her there is a uniting from the left, from Ecologists, Socialist Party, and Mélenchon Party. So it's a big thing for the next election because if the left is united for the next election, maybe with the mayor of Paris, there will be a possibility for them to do something.
Thank you. Your comment on the left?
Yes, actually they already gained 5 regions, if I'm not mistaken, and they are the Secretary General of the party, Olivier Faure, also confirmed already yesterday that they have one more alliance, so they will have at least 6 regions or maybe more out of 13, And there is also an interesting thing concerning Valérie Pécresse. The thing I wanted to emphasize that yes, she is a woman. She is we can say that she's a Republican, but she is a Macron compatible, so-called Macron compatible. She launched her own movement in 2017. Soyons libres. Let us be.
Like Xavier Bertrand.
Yes, like Xavier Bertrand. So I think the Republicans' position at the moment is quite not so firm, I would say. But and one of the biggest reasons behind this is that the alliances are coming day by day, and this is the situation now with Jean-Laurent Félicien, maybe you know him. Yes, he's an ecologist, and he already made the alliance with the Socialists and the Mélenchon Party and the Communists, just in order to curb the Rassemblement National's candidate, and probably he will have it and he will make it. And this is a bit similar situation to what happened in 1938 when Churchill said to Chamberlain after the Munich Agreement that when France and Great Britain left for Hitler, Czechoslovakia, and he said that you had the right to choose between war and dishonor, and you have chosen dishonor, but maybe you cannot avoid the fight and the war. So this is what happens at the moment, I think, on a wide scope. At the moment.
Back about what you just say about Les Républicains, there are two things. First, Les Républicains already won this election. It's big. But there is another problem. It's that there are too many candidates now who won the election, Xavier Bertrand and Laurent Wauquiez. If they don't find a unique candidate for their party, they will be divided, so they will lose. That's a big problem, because Laurent Wauquiez had a big victory. He can come.
I think if I were a member of Les Républicains, I would reply, we used to have no candidates, now we have too many. That's a better problem.
Exactly.
But let me ask you about one issue, and maybe others too, but particularly the issue of anti-Semitism, because France, and the same is true, unfortunately, in England as well, is seeing attacks on French people, and many French people uprooting themselves and feeling they have to make an emigration to Israel. And many Jews are feeling this way. So I have to ask, what role is anti-Semitism playing in this election? Not in the sense of motivating anybody, but in the sense of what actions are being taken or what proposals are being suggested against it, because it's obviously a much bigger problem for our societies than until now we've really been prepared to consider. Now, local elections, perhaps not the obvious place to debate them, but nonetheless, do you see this issue becoming a bigger one? How to combat anti-Semitism?
It's always about the left in France. You know, anti-Semitism doesn't come from the alt-right in France. It is coming from the alt-left. So we could look at the situation in Île-de-France region, where there was an alliance between Mélenchon party, with a lot of anti-Semitism personality in it, with Socialist party, which is a government party. So this alliance is very bad for democracy, very bad for youth, and so on. But I think we could consider the question of anti-Semitism maybe more next year for the presidency, because it's very linked in France with the question of Islam. Because, finally in France we have the Israelo-Palestinian conflicts. It's very important in France. And finally, those who defend Islamism on the left, they are often anti-Semitism. And on the right, people who are more fighting against Islamism, like Erik Tegnér, is a Jew. And we are often accused on the right, I have been accused of that, to be, pro-Europe, to be Zionist and so on by the left, because for them it's a problem. But I think it's not a big issue, because we really fight a lot against anti-Semitism in France.
Do you have any comments on that topic?
No, I just wanted to react concerning the alt-right, alt-left. 2 years ago, I guess, there were many attacks against Jewish people, in especially in Paris as well. And if I'm not mistaken, there was a kind of marche blanche, peut-être, maybe, which was organized.
For example, the candidates of the United left in Île-de-France region for this election didn't want to come to this manifestation, because he didn't want to perturb his Muslim electorate, and that's the biggest issue, and that's why it's very dangerous in France with the alt left, who just gave up the workers to help communities, and often Muslim communities, which are more touched by anti-Semitism.
I want to ask a final question. Obviously, this is the first of two elections. Next week, we'll probably be back to discuss how it looks, whether we've changed our minds on any of these points after the next election. But there's obviously, in every country in Europe, it seems to me at the moment, a slow realignment taking place, in which parties, to some extent, are shrinking or disappearing. We discussed the left. Other parties, the Greens, are often expanding. And you have on the right the decline of mainstream right parties, not in this election, but over a period, and the rise of what are called, I think sometimes inaccurately, populist parties. How do you think that these developments are going to end up? I mean, are we moving towards a completely different electoral situation in France and maybe in other countries?
The problem is in France, Marine Le Pen, because we don't have the possibility to have a candidate of populism because of her, and we can't unite, Républicain and Rassemblement National because of it. And Marine Le Pen, no, is not populist. Finally, Marine Le Pen is much more from the left than from the right. I think, you maybe think that it's weird, but it's the case. She doesn't talk anymore about Islamism, she doesn't talk a lot about, immigration, and she's very socialist about economy and so on. That's why, the population just doesn't go to vote. And that's why I think Emmanuel Macron could really win the next election. I think he's not a loser for this election, because he doesn't want any concurrency in his party. It's a good thing for him to not have, big region with someone who could, oppose against him. His main problem is that his best adversary, is Marine Le Pen. But I think our problem is that, in France we have a population on the right, but we always elect people from the left.
And your response?
Yes, I think I just want to get back to the south part of the country of France. After the independence war of Algeria in 1962, if I'm not mistaken, after that, many people poured into Europe, especially into France, coming from Algeria and from the Maghreb region, of course. And that time they felt that they were abandoned. They were left by General de Gaulle. That was the reason behind they voted in favor of Jean-Marie Le Pen that time. Now they have the problems of them are already changed, but they are still in favor of Le Pen, now Marine Le Pen, but they have this almost not the same problems, but they have the problems with immigration, which also can be treated now on a firm way by Le Rassemblement National, Marine Le Pen. So I think this can be the main reason that I am still in favor of, and I still believe in the victory of Thierry Mariani in the PACA region, in the south part of France, because we can say that the problems are already changed, but there are now new problems which can also be treated only this part of political parties. I mean the immigration. The people who are living on the south part of France, they don't want to pay the costs of the living costs of the everyday life of immigrants coming from the Maghreb region.
Yes, but after the only thing is that in France, the main electors are the old person, and the retreated,
Yes,
and they don't want to vote for Rassemblement National because they get worried about their money and so on. So they want, people who have competence. And Marine Le Pen doesn't give the impression that she is competent. So I think, unfortunately, they will vote again from. I have three things. I think Thierry Mariani will lose. I think Marine Le Pen will be much more contested the next week, and I think it will be the beginning of a big fight between Xavier Bertrand and Laurent Wauquiez. We could talk about it.
Well, I think we will talk about it. We will do so next week after the second round of the elections. So I want to thank all of you who are watching for tuning in to us, and I'd like to thank the absent Anne-Elisabeth Moutet and the present Ágnes Magyar and Erik Tegnér. Thank you very much indeed. So much for the first round. A week later, the second stage of the elections was held, and it more or less confirmed the first round of the elections. Namely, the National Front did badly again. Their voters simply didn't turn out. President Macron, again, his party did not do well. And the centre-right Les Républicains, they did well indeed, and they now have several candidates who are, so to speak, jostling for position to be their party's contender in next year's presidential elections. So we brought together the three contenders in another sense, our three discussants, and they are going to now examine, first of all, how did their predictions turn out, and secondly, what do the elections considered in total, what do they portend for the next presidential elections in April of next year?
Very well, I'm sorry, Ágnes. No. Yes, the two things to remember. First, finally, French people didn't hear the media and politicians who asked them to go to vote. They didn't vote more than the last weekend. And secondly, Marine Le Pen didn't succeed to win the election in PACA with Thierry Mariani. That's why I think it was a big defeat for her.
Now, you were a bit higher on Marine Le Pen than Erik, and indeed than Anne-Elisabeth. Perhaps I could ask you to just describe why you think what happened, why she didn't do well.
Yes, it's a good question. Honestly, I was thinking about the past of Marine Le Pen's party, which just changed its name almost 4 years ago now, from Front National to Rassemblement National, and it was an interesting message which was conveyed by the father of Marine Le Pen a day ago. And his explication was, which I also can confirm, but I'm also very curious about your opinion, Erik, if it is the truth or not, or if it can be the case or not. Jean-Marie Le Pen said the Le Pen anti-diabolisation, it would say, we could say it in English, or we could translate it to English as a certain activity which tried to get rid of the old school Jean-Marie Le Pen. Maybe it resulted in these election results. It means that Marine Le Pen is quite not so tough anymore, not enough tough anymore, not enough hardcore anymore. But his father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, in the 1980s or even later, he was a very hardcore Front National party politician. And his prediction for the future is that if Marine Le Pen will go ahead and continue this way, I mean, she doesn't represent a real hardcore Front National or Rassemblement National, the party of Marine Le Pen will disappear in a certain time.
Yes,
well,
because yes. I'm sorry, John. the thing is that in a few words, before, when French people were very angry, they voted for Rassemblement National and for Marine Le Pen. Today, they do like me, they stay home, because it's the manner to explain that the politicians, people are not good for them. And I think Marine Le Pen, why it is a big defeat for her? Because when she lost the first turn of this election, she was very, very angry against her electors. It was crazy. She was on the TV saying them, go to vote or else it will be your fault and so on. It was crazy, but her electors didn't go more than before to vote. So it's a personal defeat, I think, and it's not good for her for the next election.
Now that leads me to you, Anne-Elisabeth, because you actually were right about Marine Le Pen, but you were also, I think, right about President Macron, because you said that he wouldn't do as well as, in a sense, most people had previously expected. That didn't happen. So why, and what follows from that?
Agree with Erik, and I agree with Ágnes that Marine Le Pen did badly, and she did badly for a number of reasons. The way I see it is both that she was not perceived as terribly competent as a possible president, and this lingers on from 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago, when she ran against Macron and she had this disastrous debate in which she did not perform well. But it's also the fact that she has simultaneously been blustery and soft. And when I say soft, it's for a certain value of soft, but I actually borrow soft from Emmanuel Macron's current Home Secretary, Gérald Darmanin, who in a debate said that she was less, she was less hardline than he was on questions like law and order and immigration. And he had some cause to do this because she has been trying this sort of normalization of the national rally, hitherto the National Front, and she has said that she wanted to detoxify the brand. And the thing is, when the brand is detoxified, the brand no longer appeals to people who essentially want to sort of, punch the incumbents and bring something new, but something that will annoy them. And she was both lionized in a sort of, just given lots of air, given lots of light by the Macron people who want her as an opponent because they think he can still win. And at the same time, she was no longer something different from the rest of the politicians. And I think in some ways she suffers from that. She also has a major personal failing, which is something that has existed for a long time at the National Front rally.
which is that whenever somebody looks like they're going to have different ideas and sort of stay with her, be loyal, but express diverging opinions, she fires them. And the last person she fired is a man called Jean Messiha. He is a 50-year-old Cairo-born Copt who moved to France as an adolescent, who learned French, spoke very good French to begin with, now speaks French like a Frenchman, went to ENA, the elite government school, and is a really good advocate of his ideas. And he's a television star, and I suspect that she has resented that. But anyway, he was pushed out. Other people, desirable and less desirable, were pushed out. But essentially, there's this feeling that this will never get to be a professional organization. And one of the reasons is this. In many areas where Front National people have been running people in various elections, I know candidates who dropped out not because they disagreed, they dropped out because they say the whole thing is nepotistic and in some areas corrupt, and we're not interested. And that really is a problem of professionalism. And at the end of the day, you may say that you don't like professional politicians, but you expect them to be sort of reasonably sort of within the parameters of what you expect for somebody who's then is going to be in charge of something. That's the first thing. The other thing is that when you look at Macron, Macron himself, like the National Rally, and it's a good segue, his movement and the National Front, to some extent, have no grassroots. It's worse. I mean, it's worse in the case of the National Rally because they've been around for a long time, and their vote actually does exist in parts of France, like the southeast. But at the end of the day, there's an everyday work on the terrain that they haven't been doing, and they haven't been doing this properly. And in the case of Macron, his movement was created in 2016 to sort of bring about his victory in 2017. But he had 4 years, and the fact that he was the party in power, and also in power in Parliament, and they were absolutely unable to create a sort of to grow roots in the provinces. And we were at regional elections, and the incumbents all stayed on. You look at the map of regions in France, and the colors are the same as before. And that's also got to do because Le Pen, because I don't think she can do it, and Macron, because he didn't bother to do it, and his people didn't bother to do it, were not able to sort of expand in that. And then you had the fact that in general, the electorate was not interested, and that 5 years ago, they voted for Macron, they voted for Marine Le Pen 4.5 years ago, they voted for Macron, they voted for Le Pen, because they really just wanted to thumb, their nose at the current crowd. But now they're all part of the current crowd, and that's a real problem.
So everyone seems to think that Macron cannot win against a strong opponent, and yet it does appear you also think he may have a very strong opponent in in someone from the Republican Party, the French Les Républicains. So let me go to you, Erik, first, and ask: is that his analysis or not?
First, I would say that there was a spoils this weekend where Xavier Bertrand had a big score, for the next presidency at 18%. So we could say in a way that a member from Les Républicains could access to the second turn. And if Xavier Bertrand or someone else is against Emmanuel Macron for the second turns, Emmanuel Macron will lose. But we come back to our last debate with Anne-Elisabeth last week about the potential candidacy for the presidency of Erik Zemmour. Because, today in France, many people talks about this subject again. If Erik Zemmour is candidate, he could take a lot of votes to the candidates of Les Républicains and to Xavier Bertrand. He could take maybe 4 or 5 points. So if Les Républicains don't find an agreement with him, they couldn't access to the second turn. And Marine Le Pen has the same problem because he could take votes to Marine Le Pen too. So the thing is that we don't have a fight between Les Républicains and Marine Le Pen to access to the second turn. I think that the new thing is that we can have a third person, a third personality, because with this big defeat of Marine Le Pen, for the regional election. There is a fight in his own camp, and Erik Zemmour can be the winner of that. I'm not saying that Erik Zemmour can win the presidency. I'm saying that finally rules have changed.
Rules have changed. I think you probably agree with that.
Yes, and I fully agree with Erik. And there's one thing I want to add. Concerning the abstention, I think we have to take into consideration that neither the right wing, the extreme right wing of the French politics, nor the extreme left voters went to the ballot box last Sunday. And that's the reason why we witness this result, especially, I mean, this success for the conservative right and also and as well the conservative
the center right,
yes, and the center left. I think one of the main reasons can be, and please confirm or tell me if I'm wrong, maybe the voters of Emmanuel Macron that time didn't want to go to vote because, of course, first reason, holiday just started, but the second, and I think the main reason was, or could be, that the voters voted in 2017 Emmanuel Macron because he promised that he could be a bridge for the future. He could represent all together the leftists, the center-right and the center-left as well. But after 4 years, the voters of him witnessed that it didn't happen. So actually, they don't really give, or they cannot trust Emmanuel Macron's party anymore. That's the reason why they didn't go to the ballot box, and they didn't. And if they went to, they didn't tick the box for the party of Emmanuel Macron.
I think that you are right in a way, but wrong in another way. First, you are right because there is a kind of doubt within the electors of Emmanuel Macron. And Emmanuel Macron needs for the year which is coming to show that he wants to make reforms, especially about retreats. But where you are wrong is that the new thing today, I think, is there is a disconnection between Emmanuel Macron and his party. Finally, my opinion is that he never wanted to create a right party. He doesn't want a party because he doesn't want to have a concurrency against him. So nobody could really think that Emmanuel Macron, the party of Emmanuel Macron, could win the election. It couldn't win the election because Emmanuel Macron never really invested in his party. I think he invested much more with Gérald Darmanin, Bruno Le Maire, finally in Les Républicains than his own party.
Yes, and maybe he disillusioned not only the average, the people of the average age, but also the young generation, because they actually, out of 10 young people,
85% of the
9 out of 10 young people didn't go to vote, and they opted for abstention. So Macron cannot promise anything anymore to the young generation.
Yes, but
I want to intervene here and say, look, you all accept that Les Républicains did well in the elections, and you in fact accepted that the previous time. But you then consistently are pessimistic about their success in the presidential election next year. And I want to raise to you, Anne-Elisabeth, the question here, exactly why? Because whatever its other faults, or whatever their other faults, Les Républicains are a genuine party. I mean, they have strength in depth in the provinces, in cities. They have mayors, they have members of parliament. They could take over the government and run it tomorrow, and nobody would expect them to collapse or anything like that, which is the fear with insurgent parties. So why do you not think they are odds-on, very firm favourites to win next time?
First of all, because they have form and a sort of heavy record in snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. And they are, I mean, I've seen headlines that talk about the Gaullist Party. It started off as a Gaullist party, but it's a concatenation of a number of the small and big parties to the center, and people who still did not much like de Gaulle, but he was dead. He'd been dead for a while, and they sort of gathered into the center-right coalition. But I have friends who normally vote for this party, and their first reaction seeing Xavier Bertrand give this sort of address saying, "This is my plan for France," the minute he knew that he was the president of the region, was to say, "I'm never voting for him. I'm not interested. I liked François-Xavier Bellamy, the candidate at the European elections, who did not do well at all because he's not tried. He's a very interesting politician, but he's not a professional politician, and it showed." And even in the European elections, which is the election where you least need to be a professional politician, it still showed. But people have still this attitude on the right, because the right has actually split on a number of issues. You've got possibly a majority, but not a winning majority of the right, that is in effect really more to the center than to the right, and we have fewer cultural wars per se in France than you'd think, except the left is trying to bring some, but you still have cultural wars on the right, and in the cultural wars on the right, you've got people who say, "I will never vote for somebody who voted for euthanasia, for instance. I will never vote for somebody who doesn't oppose abortion, was on the wrong side at the time," whatever you call the wrong side, at the time of the fight against assisted procreation for single women, that sort of thing. And that is a groupment of people within the French right who do not have a voice mostly in the French right because they're not fashionable. But they are largely Catholic. They are bereft. The last right-wing candidate who would have done well, except that he was stupid and others made use of his stupidity over the year, François Fillon. I mean, it was not invented, what they said about his paying his wife a salary as parliamentary assistant while she was doing nothing, and it was not invented that he'd been given expensive made-to-measure suits by a Lebanese lawyer. And actually you think, do I want to elect as president somebody who will receive the gift of something like $40,000 worth of suits from a Lebanese lawyer? Please, this guy can do anything and probably get it wrong. But anyway, so they lost their candidate the one time when this candidate, without quite saying that he was Catholic, was sending all the signals that that component part of the French right, especially in the provinces, was waiting for. Xavier Bertrand is not the same type at all. He's really somebody who's on the center right. He's somebody who will have no problem with the platform of Sarkozy at the end, when Sarkozy was trying fruitlessly to attract some voters in the middle by using some of the tropes of the left. And you get many people in the French right, reasonable people, who would never vote for Marine Le Pen and who say, there's no point in voting for a candidate who's not really right-wing. This is why Macron right now is trying to break the right by having this fairly hardline Home Secretary, who's no candidate that we're going to see this time, Gérald Darmanin, who has no problems telling Marine Le Pen that she's too far soft on crime and immigration. So you've got this complex group of people who do not have an umbrella party the way, for instance, the Conservatives have in Britain. And what is quite remarkable, and it's admired by now some Gaullists in France, is that Boris Johnson has managed to bring back the vote of all sorts of outliers within the Tory party. There's no real strength to either UKIP party or Brexit party. They're gone. And all of these people who disagree on main points, essential points, still live within the Conservative umbrella because it's an almost 300 years old party, and they know basically what they stand for. And the French have been completely unable to do this, if only because the word conservative and the word right is an insult, and that they've left the left take over the superstructure, if you want to speak like Gramsci, and there's this whole influence that if you're not left-wing, you're a horrible person. But if you are a right-wing voter, you want your politicians to say, I'm on the right, and when they don't, I'm a reasonable person, I'm not a monster, I'm not a fascist, I don't want to have people sort of rounded up in stadia the minute I arrive, and still, I have right-wing values, and none of them tries to say it. And that's something that the French right has been suffering for decades, and I don't see them changing.
Before I turn to our other two speakers, I have a narrowly local UK question for our British listeners, which is, Of course, the only person in Britain whom anyone is interested in as a contender for the French presidency is Michel Barnier, or as we call him, Dr. No. And he's the man who did the negotiating on behalf of the European Union with the British over Brexit. Now, he's obviously a contender. Does he have a chance?
Well, all I can say is nobody has been bringing up his name last weekend. And to some extent, it probably wasn't the time, because you had three main personalities of the Républicain Party, Valérie Pécresse, Laurent Wauquiez, and Xavier Bertrand, and they all were coming saying, look, I creamed the left, I hammered them, and vote for me. So Barnier, he's been very firm with the British, and it may be a bit of a vote getter, but not as much as polemicists, including in my own newspaper in England, believe it is. And so he is thinking of it. So far, he's not electable. Brexit is central to the British. It is absolutely not central to the French. It is, however, central to Emmanuel Macron, because Emmanuel Macron right now has gone into sort of a mirror universe from Monday on. He's been going, on Monday, he was in Douai, which is in Xavier Bertrand country, although, it was complete coincidence, of course, opening a factory which is going to create 1,000 jobs in high-tech, paid by the Chinese, by the way, which nobody had anything against, and saying that France was the most attractive country in Europe, and choose France is what happens, and all those banks are going to come from the City of London, and essentially saying everything is wonderful, nothing to see here. And in that case, he needs to remind the French at regular intervals that Brexit is a disaster, in which case he might like to remind people of Brexit by himself. The question is, who would Barnier run as? Would he run as a conservative against the president who mandated him to go and negotiate, or was instrumental within the European leadership at the Commission to mandate him to negotiate? We don't know. Right now, he's a non-starter. He could become, if you have a bit of tri-dimensional chess going on with the Macron trying to sort of steal this from the Conservatives, and have him as a kind of dark horse either on his side or his possible prime minister. But then he's supposed to have a reshuffle in autumn. He refused to have a reshuffle after this defeat. It's not going to have a reshuffle in summer, although you can't expect anything. One way of neutralizing Barnier and also of spoiling his image a bit would be to ask Barnier in September to become prime minister. As president, we know he's been looking at things, but I think so far he's a non-starter, but everything is so in the air that he could be viable in January. Who knows?
Yes, I don't think you have any interest in discussing that point. If you wish to do so, do so. But let me also raise the question which I raised last time. Did you see in these results any sign of a pathway to the presidency for the left?
I don't think the left has this luck for the next election. 20% of the French people think that they are from the left. I think they are dead. From Anne Hidalgo could be a good candidate, but her candidate for the Île-de-France region, Audrey Pulvar, had a very bad score. There will be the division with the left, because Jean-Luc Mélenchon will run for the presidency. Nobody can negotiate with him, so he will have maybe 10%. And after, we could have a kind of alliance between Socialist Party, Ecology, and so on, but it's not more than 10%, so it's impossible. But I would like to just come back on your question about Michel Barnier. I have a revelation for every foreigners who listen to us. Nobody cares about Michel Barnier in France. I don't know why in Europe everybody talks to me a lot about who is Michel Barnier. Michel Barnier could be the solution and so on, but no French knows Michel Barnier. I really think that even Emmanuel Macron has a kind of mépris for Michel Barnier. He will never choose him like a minister, like a prime minister and so on, because Michel Barnier doesn't represent anything in France. But he's the leaders of the Republicans respect him, but they respect him because they know that he's not dangerous.
Yes. Now, Ágnes, obviously one of the preoccupations in Budapest is how any election result in Western Europe affects the EU's relationship with Hungary and with Viktor Orban. Now, I don't have an impression that these results point in any particular direction. But can you tell me if they do or if they don't? And particularly, if you are Viktor Orban sitting there watching the results come in, what are you thinking?
Very good question. It's interesting. If I were Viktor Orban, what I would say, honestly, that the main, I think the main values or the main, values of not only the European values, but the main values, party values we share, is mainly coming from the Les Républicains party from France. Actually, we have the common ground with them. But at the moment, then you know that a couple of months ago, the Fidesz just left the EPP. But the values still remain the same. And I think at the moment, let it be for the Fidesz, let it be a PCR party which we join, let it be a new coalition, new alliance we create. The Fidesz create. The only thing we have to defend, or not the only thing, but the values we have to defend, the sovereignty, the family benefits, and of course family-based society, work-based society, and so many things which corresponds to the Les Républicains party at the moment in France. But I also have to emphasize that the ideas and the thoughts of Marion Maréchal are also interesting for the Fidesz party. She's talking a lot about at the moment this gender ideology which prevails everything, actually, almost everything in the Western European media and the Western European liberal European approach. And this is what the Hungarian government doesn't want to have in its program, or doesn't want to realize in Hungary's life, or in the Hungarian people's life. So
yes, well,
I think just I would just back Erik.
But I want to throw this one to Erik, because Erik, in French terms, you are supporting a convention of the right, bringing together the various conservative parties across partisan boundaries, and that would seem to have certain implications both for European parliamentary politics and for the politics of diplomacy with Poland and with Hungary.
I really agree with Ágnes, but the thing is that if Thierry Mariani, for example, had succeeded in Region PACA, if Marine Le Pen had won this election, I think it would have been possible maybe for the Fidesz to talk a lot with Marine Le Pen for a new group. I think that with this defeat, the Fidesz will just fight after the next election, because there will be, I really think that finally Emmanuel Macron will probably win the next presidential election, but after that Marine Le Pen, there will be a fight in Rassemblement National, and maybe Marion Maréchal could come and could get out Marine Le Pen. And yes, I think Fidesz has much more things to do with Marion Maréchal and other people than with Marine Le Pen. So I think Fidesz will be prudent until the next May next year.
Now that really brings me back to you, Anne-Elisabeth, because a few moments ago you were saying that there are a whole wing of the voters of the right which never get any satisfaction from their political representatives, and particularly those with conservative religious and moral views. They feel completely outside the system in many respects. I think, by the way, the same is true also in Spain, which explains the rise of Vox. So do you think, can you see any direction in which Maréchal could possibly emerge as a serious figure, or if not her, somebody with the same broad mixture of views.
I mean, unlike her aunt, Marion Maréchal is hardworking, willing to learn. I mean, she's really somebody who's quite respectable in the way she tackles both politics and what she's tried to do, which is her political science school in Lyon, ICEP, which was, as usual, sort of derided by the usual suspects, but which is actually a good place. It's small, it will get somewhere, because she is somebody who's all her life, she's believed in hard work, studying, learning, listening. And that's really something quite impressive in a leader, and that's something normally I would welcome. She's got some negatives, and it's not just the fact that even though she no longer wears the name, she is the niece and the granddaughter of Le Pen's. And it's that while I talk about that segment of the French right that would identify with what she says, it is seen as toxic in France for all sorts of reasons, including those inherited from the French Revolution of 1789, or rather 1793 in that case. And it's the same thing in Spain, because the Catholic Church is tainted with Franco's regime. And Franco's regime, those wounds are not healed in Spain yet. And so that is something in which I'm not sure that would be a good component, because she's inherited the part of, oh, this woman is poisoned, from her aunt. She's entirely different, but it would be more interesting to see in France somebody who would talk like, for instance, François-Xavier Bellamy, with a good deal of thought brought onto things, and who would be different. And what we've got also is we still have the usual suspects. Xavier Bertrand was Minister for Social Affairs and Health under Nicolas Sarkozy, where he actually performed well. Laurent Wauquiez has been the incumbent and the governor, well, the préfet, the head honcho in the region of Auvergne for a long time. Valérie Pécresse has has been re-elected in the Paris-Île-de-France region, but she was Minister for Universities under Sarkozy. All these people have had a career for some time, and they've survived in a way because they haven't got such strong personalities. So we are facing a sort of established figures who really do not want to let anybody else board the boat, and a lack of interesting characters, mostly also because the French do not like eccentrics, the French do not like different people, the French are not, there are many ways of tall poppies that you immediately mow down in this country, and this is true of everything in France, in the civil service, in companies, in corporations, in general life, in schools. This is not a country that welcomes sort of new originals. If we talk, and that was an interesting question, if we talk about which group Fidesz might could join, I would not advise Fidesz to join anything that would have Marine Le Pen in it. And one of the reasons is that Marine Le Pen as a Euro MP does not work. The National Rally people do not work. What is quite amazing about the people, the Hungarians at the Commission and the Hungarians in the European Parliament, that they are actually hardworking people. They introduced legislation. The Hungarian commissioner who's been working on anti-Semitism recently, and whose name will come back to me in a moment, has been doing sterling work about saying, if you have incitement to murder Jews, not Israelis, but Jews, not just Israelis, but Jews, in Palestinian school books, for instance, well, there's no reason why Europe should finance those school books. And that these are initiatives of people who are not afraid of rocking the boat, and they're founded on actual sort of good grounds legally. I don't think it is the place of a party, which is a party of government like Fidesz, to be with a bunch of people who essentially all the time that they had Euro MPs did not do much. I think ACRE is a really interesting party. I think there are other parties in other European countries. But I would steer away from essentially people who have proven that they were not inside an institution they do not necessarily approve of, but working hard within the rules and using every aspect of legislation, of possibility, to actually make a difference. And that's really what Fidesz has been doing in the European Parliament. And I really think that it would be a waste to consign them with a bunch of lazy bones.
Well, I'm going to ask a final question, but before I do, let me say that I'm going to take the same risks that you took last time, and I'm going to predict that the next president of France is going to be from the right, and it's going to be from the moderate centre-right. It's going to be whoever emerges from the scrum in Les Républicains. So that's my prediction. You can laugh at me in a year's time. Now, here's one final question, and it's really from left field. The British are no longer in European politics in the formal sense. They're not part of the EU. But of course, they're next door, and European politics, EU politics influences them. And I wonder if the reverse is true. Does what is happening in Britain at the moment influence what is happening in France and more broadly Europe, or not? And if it does, how? I will begin and ask you all to be fairly brief on this one. Begin with you, Anne-Elisabeth, then you, Ágnes, then finally, Erik.
Well, I've just quoted this think tank called Le Millénaire, which is a Gaullist think tank created by young people in politics, special advisors to ministers or to personalities in the opposition. And they had this poll that they ran in France, asking about the popularity of Boris Johnson. And to everybody's surprise, first of all, 85% of the French knew who Boris Johnson was. And believe me, they cannot tell the name of the leaders of most European countries. And not only that, but 51% have a favorable opinion of him. And they found him sympathique. Now, it doesn't translate necessarily into, oh, I want to vote for Boris Johnson instead of Macron. But what it does is that, again, he is, no matter what he is, first of all, he's the politician who reaches the parts that others don't. And second, he is also somebody who is perceived as having the common touch, which is something that is denied him on the left and even sometimes in his party in Britain. But we see this again and again. His first problem in his first by-election that he lost last week was a by-election in which the Tory candidate was beaten by the Lib Dem, partly because you had angry Tory voters, not the rest. And so you really have a phenomenon here, and that's an interesting one. Other than that, first of all, and why was the Le Millénaire taking this up? They were saying exactly what I talked about earlier, but actually I derived a bit of my reasoning from them, which is it is important for democracy to have large parties that are within which you have a political debate, even hard, more than having splinter groups that are not professional and go in any direction. This is not a good thing for democracy. You change them, once you've used them up, but it's sterile and it's bad for the country. And that is interesting because I think William Tay and his people in Paris, they are bringing something new and they're looking at the Brits. They are, I really should say, in a small minority. Most of the French have got caricature IDs of the British. At the time of the vaccination rollout, there was a huge difference in which I was on popular TV talk shows, and everybody said, they're doing it right. Why don't we have somebody like, Boris Johnson doing this, vaccination. And that really made a difference. But we are, reaching a point in which people don't think of Britain, first of all. They also, it's very easy to say they're ruining our farmers, they're ruining our fishermen, and you know how you foment those reactions, and they are doing that. This happens on both sides of the channel. They both do that. So not too much. The choice, which was actually a political choice and a risky choice, and politics is risk, and the French have inscribed the principle of precaution in the French constitution, which is that nobody takes risks anymore in our country, and I don't think you can do politics if you're not able to take risks from time to time, which is the major problem. It will be identified, I think, at some stage of the debate as well.
Thank you very much. Ágnes.
Of course, there is a certain impact of foreign affairs politics on France, I'm sure. But the most, concerning a survey which was conducted just a couple of weeks ago in France, concerning the main preoccupations of the French people is illegal migration, healthcare issues, because of mainly the COVID-19, and insecurity. And of course, illegal migration, I would say. So nowadays we can say that, of course, there is certain impact what happens in Britain, but mainly Now there is the second etap, the second part of vaccination inoculation, which opens now in France, which was just a couple of hours ago declared by Valérie Pécresse. And they will mainly focus on vaccination and the collective immunity in France, because they would like to set up not only in the big villages, big cities, but also in every second villages some vaccination centers. Because the main target of politicians at the moment that to gain and to have a almost full collective immunity in France. So I think this is the main point at the moment in France.
Erik, finally.
Yeah, I agree with all what you said. First, I would say that foreign affairs will be much less important next year than the last presidential election, where Donald Trump just won the presidency, where there was, Bolsonaro and so on. It was the good way for populism. Now, I think that there will be two main subjects next year in France. First, the economy. It's all about economy, and Emmanuel Macron just began that the day after the election this weekend, and he was with Xavier Bertrand. It was kind of funny to see that. And about reindustrialization. And I agree with you when you say that we will maybe have a president from the center-right moderate. And I think that Emmanuel Macron wants to be this guy, because he wants to talk about reindustrialization. And the second subject after economy will be security. Emmanuel Macron knows that 20 years ago, the Prime Minister, Lionel Jospin, has been eliminated. He was the candidate of the Socialist Party. He was the Prime Minister of Jacques Chirac during a kind of cohabitation. And everybody said that he could win the presidential election, but finally he didn't success to access to the second term. Why? Because he was very bad about insecurity. And that's the main problem of Emmanuel Macron. He will have good results for economy. He expects to have 5% of augmentation of the GDP. But I think that if he doesn't have any results about insecurity, it will be a bad thing for him.
On behalf of the Danube Institute, I would like to thank Erik Tegnér, Ágnes Magyar and Anne-Elisabeth Moutet for giving us their opinions and their analysis of the recent local elections in France. We will be bringing back other experts to discuss the coming elections in Germany, in France, in Hungary, and when they occur in Italy and Spain as well. And if you care to tune in to watch us, I think you'll get similarly interesting, lively, and perhaps predictive discussions. Thank you.